Now, Drake's recent album sales and what they really mean. As some of y'all might know, Drake just dropped an album recently. Well, technically, it's a collab project with Canadian singer PartyNextDoor. There's been a lot of discussions around these sales with a lot of different opinions floating around about what they really mean. And in this video, I want to have an objective conversation about the topic at hand. Now, Drake is in a very interesting place in his career. Numbers wise, he's still one of the most successful rappers on the planet, along with his biggest rival, Kendrick Lamar. And despite what some people might want to believe, it's undeniable that Drake still holds a strong position in the game. However, the way people view him right now is more divided than ever. And that, of course, is a direct result of his ongoing feud with Kendrick. I've noticed that there isn't really a lukewarm response to Drake these days. You either love him or hate him, and honestly, that's nothing new. Drake has always been a very polarizing artist on a personal level. Despite the fact that his music appeals to such a wide demographic, that's actually what has allowed him to dominate for so long. But over the past year, the reception towards him has been noticeably more split. A lot of people feel very strongly about him, either in support or completely against him. And personally, I land somewhere in the middle, although I'd say I lean more towards liking him than not. Practically, I grew up on his music since I used to be a very big Young Money fan back in the day. And around 2015, 2016, after the ghostwriting rumors, or maybe not rumors, right? And going into Views, I started gravitating less towards Drake's music. Not because he fell off, because let's be real, Views was a very big moment for Drake. But something about his music didn't resonate with me the same way it once did. Maybe it was a shift in his sound, or maybe it was just me growing out of that Drake era. Either way, I found myself checking less and less for Drake. But even with that, one thing about Drake is that he always finds a way to stay relevant. Whether it's through his music, his influence, or just even the conversation surrounding his name. There's more discourse about Drake than ever about where he stands in the game. The question isn't just about whether his music still hits. It's about how his next move is gonna land, especially when the public perception around him has soured. I'd say Drake undeniably took a hit reputation-wise after his feud with Kendrick. A lot was said during that beef, and his public image took a serious blow. Naturally, this has led to people wondering, how is his next album gonna end up performing? Kendrick, of course, is always going to come up in these conversations as well, and he's been doing extremely well for himself. His last album, GNX, which dropped on November 22nd, has been doing phenomenal numbers. In the week after the Super Bowl, the album ended up selling 236,000 copies. Not first week sales, so obviously these are massive numbers given how long it's been out. People have been comparing the two even more lately, especially after Kendrick's Super Bowl boost. His album and Not Like Us is still reaching a lot of people, and that momentum is feeding into his success. So naturally, the question has been, what about Drake though? You know, that's the million-dollar question. Drake recently dropped a collab project with PartyNextDoor, which has been the talk of the town. The project, titled Some Sexy Songs for You, is without a doubt a record for the women. As a matter of fact, the album was released on Valentine's Day, which is basically International Lover Boy Day at this point, right? And that's a fitting marketing move for Drake considering his music and, you know, his brand. PartyNextDoor, as most people know, is an artist who's always thrived in that smooth, atmospheric R&B space. So when you really think about it, the way they dropped this project makes a lot of sense. Sonically, it delivers exactly what you would expect from a PartyNextDoor and Drake collab album. They've always had great chemistry, and that shows here. The music itself isn't that bad at all. There are definitely some really enjoyable tracks on here, and if you're a fan of their past work together, you'll probably find something to like. Now, I'm definitely not the target demographic for this particular album, which is probably why I'm not too crazy about it. At this stage in his career, Drake is getting older, and while he's always been, you know, known for his love songs, I feel like he's dropped way better ones in the past. And personally, I can't really relate to the themes on this project the same way. And, you know, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect with where Drake is at in his life. I was expecting him to approach the topic of love a little different this time around, but then again, his music is a reflection of how he sees the world. Now, the project ended up debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200, moving 246,000 units in his first week. And this is PartyNextDoor's first #1 album, so salute to him. But here's where the conversation starts. Are these numbers solid for Drake? Because let's be real, we all know how Drake is, you know, he's a numbers guy, right? So whenever he drops, his numbers are always going to be in the conversation. Back in 2016 with Views, Drake was dominating everything. Most streams, most digital sales, biggest album of the year. That album alone did over 1 million in total first week volume and set an all-time streaming record with 245 million plays in its debut. So when you compare that to his latest performance, it naturally raises the question, is this a decline or is it just a shift in how people consume his music? Now let's talk numbers. Drake's last collab project, Her Lost with 21 Savage did 404,000 in first week sales back in 2022. And then his last solo album, For All the Dogs, that album pulled 402,000 in first week sales. Almost identical numbers. You know, naturally people are very split on what this means for Drake. Some people feel like Drake should be doing way more because of who he is, while his fans, they see this as a W, celebrating the consistency. And one of the biggest talking points is, of course, the Kendrick comparisons, because like we mentioned earlier, Kendrick dropped GNX back in November, and then boom, Super Bowl weekend comes around and his album skyrockets in sales. Now, some people argue that the Super Bowl boost was natural, but other people believe that there's more to the story, especially when you look at how his numbers are broken down. According to Luminate, Kendrick's GNX album moved 236,000 units in the week ending February 13. Of that, 116,000 came from album sales, and out of those 116,000, a massive 87,000 were vinyls, which had actually been pre-ordered months ago but only counted this week because they just shipped. Now, DJ Academics has been pushing this idea that Drake needs to start finessing like this, basically implying that Kendrick played the system, which he didn't really play the system. He played within the confines of what the system allows. There's a very big difference, Academics. And I'll be honest with you, I thought Drake would do like at least like 400,000 with this project, especially considering the fact that the last collab project he did, you know, the one with 21 Savage, Her Loss, that one did around the same number, and For All the Dogs followed suit. Now, in Drake's defense, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, this is a collab album with Party Next Door, not 21 Savage, and that's true. You know, 21 Savage is way bigger than Party Next Door, and naturally you'd expect different numbers, right? But at the same time, Drake is still Drake. He was the machine pushing Her Loss, and he's very much the same machine pushing this project as well. And you know what I was also thinking about? I was thinking about how if this album dropped on Valentine's Day, let's say back in 2018 or 2019, this project would have easily cleared 400,000 first week. No questions. I mean, the marketing angle alone, a Drake and Party Next Door R&B project dropping on Lover's Day? Come on, man, that's a huge selling point, and I really don't think people should overlook that, because I think that's one of the biggest factors at play here. There's definitely a conversation to be had about the shift in Drake's audience over time. This project, for example, was clearly made for the women. I mean, Some Sexy Songs for You, you know, that makes it pretty obvious. And albums with this type of target demographic don't always explode in their first week sales, but they tend to age extremely well and perform better over time, especially in comparison to more rap-focused records. And a big part of that comes down to consumer behavior. Women as a whole, you know, they tend to be better long-term consumers when it comes to music. They'll listen to something today and still have that on repeat months later, right? Meanwhile, men were more likely to jump on an album early, run through it, and then move on to the next thing. That difference in engagement can have a major impact on how an album's success plays out over time. Obviously, the bigger the moment, the bigger the longevity an album is going to have in the long run. When you look at Drake's older music, who's still keeping those records alive? It's obviously women, mainly. A lot of his biggest hits, especially the ones that have stood the test of time, are the R&B driven, emotionally charged records that resonate more with women than men. Those are the songs still getting played years later, still showing up on playlists, still getting streamed consistently. And that's why a project like Some Sexy Songs for You could end up aging better than people think. It might have not exploded out the gate, but over time, it could quietly rack up major numbers just because of the way his audience engages with this type of music. Also on top of this, and this is more of a theory that I have that can't really be, you know, proven objectively, but I was having this conversation with my brother Muaz. Shout out to my guy. I think Drake low-key dropped this album just to kind of, you know, test the waters, especially since he's not entirely sure how well his music is going to be received right now. With everything that's happened over the past year, the perception around him has shifted, and this project might have been his way of gauging where he stands before making his next big move. Drake is a guy who's always had his finger on the pulse of the industry. He's built his career on adapting to trends, keeping up with the new wave of artists, and making sure he stays ahead of the curve. For this particular project, a collab album, Party Next Door, that's actually been in the works for quite some time. He accomplishes two different things. One, he's testing the waters, and two, he's doing it through someone he trusts. Party has been one of the most loyal people to Drake, especially during his feud with Kendrick Lamar. According to Drake himself, P&D stuck with him while a lot of people in the industry distanced themselves from him over the last 10 months. So it makes sense that Drake would want to, you know, keep his real friends close, especially when he's felt the impact of people switching up on him. No friends in the industry. Now, I'm not gonna throw a pity party for Drake here. You know, he's worth hundreds of millions, so he's good, okay? But this past year has been very rough for Drake, right? He's been accused of all kinds of things. He's had his name dragged through the mud, and I'm sure, you know, he's had to sit with all that, because no matter how much money you have, you can't completely isolate yourself from public perception, and you can't really isolate yourself from a guy screaming that you're a In a lot of ways, this has been the worst year of his career. At the height of his success, here comes Kendrick and says all these things, right? And even though I don't think Drake lost a bigger war per se, because he's still an undeniable icon in the industry, he did lose a battle that had real impact on how people view him. So when you really think about it, this project wasn't just a casual drop. I think Drake strategically released this album to test the market, to see where he stands, to keep his foot in the industry, and to remind people that he's still here. And also, dropping this project allows Drake to refocus on his core audience, women, because a lot of this beef talk, let's just keep it real, most women don't care, okay? They don't give two shits about this, unless we're talking about the purists. The average female listener isn't sitting around dissecting diss tracks. Women are a huge reason why Drake is where he's at today. They've been supporting him since day one, and they're not as invested in the rap battle narratives the way hardcore hip-hop fans are. And when I say that, I'm talking about the casual listener, not the people on Twitter with the Twitter fingers, because those are not casual listeners. We're talking about the people who stream his music, add his songs to their playlist, and keep his catalog in rotation long after the drama fades. And Drake is sending a message to his core audience. You know, he's telling them, hey, I still got you, okay? And here's an album to enjoy while you tune out all the noise surrounding my name in the industry right now. And honestly, I think that was a genius move. He couldn't have played it any better, because dropping a solo album right now would be a disaster for Drake if you ask me. Whether people want to admit it or not, who's having a moment right now? The guy he beefed with, Kendrick Lamar. People are still celebrating Kendrick right now. And Kendrick is still in the focal point of this conversation, still riding the wave of his Super Bowl boost, and still the artist everyone's talking about. So there was no way that Drake was gonna fuck around and drop a solo project and try to compete in the middle of all this. He'd be setting himself up for absolutely no reason. Drake fans might hear this and say, nonsense, Drake is always gonna come out on top. Well, if that's the case, how come he didn't come out on top against Kendrick, right? Because he's not bulletproof. If you actually know Drake, you should know that Drake is one of the most calculated artists in the music industry, right? The guy is very aware of what's going on around him, and he's also very aware of his strengths, but most importantly of all, of his weaknesses. And that's literally all he's been discussing for the entirety of his career, if you peel the layers of the onion and actually listen to what he says in his music. Drake knows that he can't compete right now if he drops an album. Would he sell? Absolutely, but the album will still be connected to the discourse surrounding his name, which isn't something that he wants, because when Drake drops, he always tries to sell the listener an era. Thank Me Later was an era. Take Care was an era. Nothing Was the Same was an era. Right now, we're still in the era of Drake versus Kendrick, but soon, you know, give it like 6 months tops, and a lot of this shit is gonna be in the past, because at the end of the day, there's gonna be new things that happen in the culture. I mean, shit, Kendrick might fuck around and do some crazy shit again that takes people's focus in a different direction. People will eventually move on, and yes, it's gonna be a part of his story, history, but Drake is obviously bigger than just his feud with Kendrick, and at the same time, Kendrick's success is bigger than just their beef. These are two of the biggest artists of this generation, right? And their impact goes beyond just whatever little back and forth they have. So when all this blows over, Drake is gonna, you know, eventually gear up to drop, and when that moment comes, he's gonna be swinging for his life. And honestly, he should, because Drake's next album, not just in terms of sales, but overall, will set the tone for everything moving forward. It's gonna be a defining moment for him, because Drake's music these days doesn't really carry the same cultural urgency it once did. And I think that's part of the reason why he's held off on dropping a solo project this time around. Historically, when Drake drops, the entire industry stops to listen, but things aren't like that anymore, right? On top of that, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to say more in his music, especially after everything that's happened over the past year. Some fans will expect him to address certain narratives, clear the air, or at least acknowledge the shifts in perception. And whether he chooses to do that or not, his next move is going to be heavily scrutinized. Anyway, if you made it this far, drop a like for the algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and welcome to the family. Thank you for subscribing. What do you guys think about these recent album sales from Drake? Any insight you guys want to share? Definitely let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you there. But most importantly of all, I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm out. Peace. Deuces.